After 6 years of lethargy and seeming inaction, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has in recent weeks gone into overdrive to change the narrative on his stewardship. According to the presidency, the Buhari administration has broken many jinxes since coming on board in 2015. Among the president's achievements, trumpeted by his handlers, include the signing into law of 15 legislations and completion of 17 major projects nationwide. Now joining us to give us a better perspective of Buhari's achievements is Ajuri Ngelale, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Public Affairs. Good morning, Ajuri, and welcome to the show.
Good morning to you, my dear sister, and to the crew there in Lagos. Thank you for having me.
Yes, good morning, Ajuri. It was Femi Adesina who, in another interview on television, said that this administration has been able to break many jinxes, and he provided an illustration. But for the purpose of this conversation, can you also, as a man in charge of public affairs, tell us those jinxes that have been broken?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. Let me just start by saying that I must confess here that the opening statement after 6 years of lethargy kind of caught me off guard and gave me a little bit of a humorous flourish this morning. But let me just say that the notion that we've been sitting idle or have been lethargic for 6 years, I think, does not reflect the reality. And that goes to the next question about the jinx is broken. So, for example, we know, as a matter of fact, that no administration in the history of the country, military or civilian, has embarked on the width or breadth of scope of social investment programs this administration brought into place, not last year, not 2 years ago, but really at inception between 2015 and 2016. Which is now affecting about the lives of about 12 million plus Nigerians, and it continues to expand. Of course, we have invested massively in infrastructure across the nation, roads, bridges, airports, seaports. I don't have to tell you in Lagos what has happened there. The Apapa Tollgate Road, abandoned since the late 70s, that's going to do for completion in the next few months. The Lagos-Ibadan railway is obviously being used now. It's well known to have started and have been and finished under this administration. Then, of course, the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and that's just the southwest, and that's not even half of what is being done in the southwest. So you have that kind of work going on across the country. But I think one of the areas, if I may say, has really been underreported generally, has been the president's active restructuring of the country. You know, there are those who campaigned for president on the platform of restructuring. Ironically, it's actually this president who's bringing it to bear. So you recall that for about 20 years plus, all of us had been crying out saying, why is it that state governments are able to get away with hijacking the resources of the local governments, etc. It was in June 2019, 1 month after, not even up to a month after being sworn in for his second time in office, that President Muhammadu Buhari was able to institute the new NFIU guidelines that have now made possible the direct bypassing of the state governments of the funds due to the local governments being paid directly to the local governments for the first time in this dispensation in the Fourth Republic. So that's one. Then, of course, Executive Order number 10 with the financial autonomy for states, judiciary, and legislatures, which, of course, is being pushed back on by state governments. But the president said, look, we have to take the hard decisions in the interest of the country and not in the interest of these powerful officials. And I think when you put all of that together, and there's a lot of specifics we can get into, you recognize that that's not a sign of lethargy. That's a sign of progress and breaking the jinxes.
And yet, and I'm sure you know where I'm heading when you hear "and yet," insecurity remains a plague on this country. For many people, it completely undermines all the president's achievements. What, from your perspective, is the president's scorecard on security?
Thank you very much. So, yes, no two ways about this. There are very serious security challenges in the country. And none of us are wearing rose-colored glasses about that fact. We recognize that the challenges are quite significant. In fact, this morning there is a National Security Council meeting really being conducted to, again, address these issues. But I think the key issue is, oftentimes when we assess the security challenge in the country, we assess it as almost like this zero-sum, all or nothing type of assessment where in order to be seen as successful, there should be absolutely no crime, no issues, and to be seen as a failure, there would be some crime and some issues, some insecurity, banditry, etc. I think that that's not the way that it can be assessed if you look around the world at how security is assessed or insecurity is assessed. When you recall, I was on Channels Television in 2018 doing the morning show, when morning after morning we were doing these newspaper reviews, and you were seeing casualties of 120 killed in Benue, 150 killed in Plateau last night, 110 killed in Lafayette last night, across the Middle Belt. It was absolute carnage, madness, right? You're not seeing that anymore. Part of it is the fact that you have, this administration put in place Operation World Stroke and some other initiatives to really create markable progress in the north central part of the country. We know that there were major casualties coming out of Zamfara, for example, on a daily basis as well, just about 2 years ago, before the president changed strategy in the Northwest to deal with some of those issues. Now, have we gotten to where we want to get to? Is all the hoodoo? Of course not. We have a lot of progress to make, still, a long road ahead of us. But I think anybody being fair to where we were and where we're going would recognize that we have made progress even though we're not where we want to be. Not to speak of the fact that those of us who were reporting news in Abuja and had to leave our homes every day. I was at the bombing of This Day headquarters, ironically owned by this very network. I was there reporting on it. I remember what it was like not to leave the house knowing whether I was going to come back in one piece or in pieces on a daily basis, reporting in various locations across Abuja. Since 2015, since Mr. President took office, not a single bomb has gone off in Abuja. You remember, every weekend there were bombings in mosques in Kano, Kaduna, every single weekend for several years. Dr. Abati will remember very well what his administration was facing then. So the challenges have been around. The question is, are we making progress? I think anybody being fair would recognize that we're making progress, even though we have a lot of work still to do.
All right, Ajuri, yes, we might be making progress, but I don't know if you get a chance to read the Daily Trust newspaper. That paper does a fine job of reminding us that school children in captivity, Federal Government College, Birni Yari, 83 days, Bethel Baptist High School, Kuguma, 65 days. And if I check through the papers, all I still see is that chaos. Heavy clampdown on bandits in Zamfara. That's the front page of the Daily Trust. If you check across the paper, every time they talk about the insecurity, thousands of people have died, thousands of people have been displaced. So I don't know the paper you're reading, Ajuri. That's number one question to you. Number two will be second quarter 2015. You can go check the data. When this administration did come into power, the unemployment rate was 8.34%. 8.34%. In fact, first quarter before the elections, it was about 7.16%. But today, fourth quarter 2020, it is 33.8%. So tell me, with all the social intervention program, with all the trader money and every money given around, with all the great work you have done, how have you grown unemployment from 8.34% to 33.28%? Just two questions, Ajuri.
It's always good to be with you, my old friend Rufai. Always a pleasure to engage with you in particular. Let me just say that the newspapers I read are the same newspapers you read, which is why we're very sober about the fact that there are still challenges that we have to deal with. I started by saying that, and I'll continue to say that. None of us are pretending that all is well and we're living in heaven on earth. That is not the situation. We have a lot of work to do. We're simply recognizing the fact that we've made quite significant progress on the security question. Now, again, you've asked the second question that has to do with unemployment. I think there are a few things to unpack here. First of all, let me ask, maybe if I may, ask anybody in the Lagos studio now, if you really believe in your heart of hearts, and you can look with your eyes into the camera and tell Nigerians whether you actually believe that at any point in the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in this country, that we had 8% of the population. Out of 200 million people, let me tell you what 8% is. That is, if it's 200 million people, 10% would be 20 million. Do you believe that we have effectively had 16 million people out of 200 million that were unemployed in the country in the last 20, 30, 40 years. I don't believe any of us believe that that's accurate at any point, specifically not in 2015 when the value of the currency and all of the other things were falling off the table. We're moving into a recession as a result of the global oil crash. I don't think anybody believes that we've ever had an 8% unemployment rate in this country in modern history. But with that said, the fact of the matter is we have had 2 recessions. We have had a once-in-a-century global pandemic. These are major challenges. When you look at the developed countries of the world even, and you're seeing people in America being evicted out of their homes en masse because they can't afford their rent, then you know that it's going to be a challenge in developing countries that are not nearly as wealthy, right? So we've had our challenges. What we've said is this. Understand that when we talk about the unemployment rate, you've asked a good question about, okay, well, you've done social investment. Yes, massive investment in infrastructure, construction. Okay, why is unemployment rate growing? First of all, we have to understand 2 things. One, the issue of accuracy of data, which is what I just alluded to. None of us believe that this country had 8% unemployment any time in the last 40 years. That's ridiculous.
Those were data put out by MBS. Ajuri,
yes.
Just for context sake,
if I can just land.
Those were data put out by the Bureau of Statistics. So that means you're saying your own government agency is wrong on the data.
Right.
Okay, good.
Well, no. First of all, let me be clear. First of all, in the first part of 2015, it was not our agency. It was an agency of the federal government of Nigeria. We were not in the federal government of Nigeria at that time. And by the way, this is supposed to be a nonpartisan institution that gives you the very best of what they can give you in terms of the data that they've been able to accumulate. So it's not about who's in power, who's not in power. And the issue is not about whether government looks good or looks bad with the data that comes out. The issue is about whether the data is accurate so that you can effectively plan as a government future economic interventions you want to make. So there are a few issues to unpack. One is that do you recognize that right now in this country, and it's a major challenge and it's something that President Muhammadu Buhari had asked the statistician general, the previous one who has just gone out, to address, which is this issue of the fact that right now in this country, Nigeria, we have tens of millions of informal enterprises, informal MSME entrepreneurs, people who own market stalls in markets across the country, small boutiques and shops across the country, who may not be formally registered with the CAC as a company name, may not be registered with the FIRS, paying taxes, etc. But they are not only over the poverty line, but they are actually employing other Nigerians who are over the poverty line. But guess what? Because of how data has been tabulated over the last decade plus, right now, all of these informal MSMEs, tens of millions, we're not talking of just a few 100,000 here, are being tabulated as number 1, unemployed, and they're also being tabulated as number 2, under the poverty line, when in fact it is the opposite. So what we are saying is that we actually have very serious challenges around statistical data collection and accuracy, which is something we're working to address. So we want to get an accurate picture, not to make us look good or look bad, but to get an accurate picture as to how we can more effectively intervene in the economy. The second part of your question, please, the final part, was you asked why is it that the unemployment rate went from 8%, which we all know is a lie in the first place, to 33%. Now, understand this. If we created 1 million jobs every single year, which would be far and away the most jobs any administration would have created in the history of the country, 1 million jobs every year, the unemployment rate would still grow. Why? The fact of the matter is right now we have about 600,000 graduates coming into the labor force every year, and in addition to about 1.2 million additional non-graduates, young people coming into the labor force, meaning you have approximately 2 million. So if you create 1 million jobs, which would be more than any other administration in history every year, the unemployment rate would still be exponentially growing because you have to be able to cater to 2 million people coming into the labor force every year. The solution is not to cry or lament. The solution is to make sure that you are providing the enabling infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, airports, seaports, power plants, dams, and all of the things we're working hard to invest in to attract the private enterprise and industry that will ultimately create those jobs, because no government in the world is able to create all of the jobs necessary for its people, and certainly not in a country with a population of 200 million.
Well, Ajuri, I understand how tough this job is. I haven't been there myself. But I would like to ask you, in the last week or so, there's been a lot of talk about legacy construction, breaking jinxes and all that. Do you guys have a methodology in place, a strategy in place to construct the legacy that everyone around the presidency is now beginning to talk about. Because I know, yes, you have to convince the people, but it's not very easy, convincing the Nigerian people. You must have a strategy or a methodology in place. It's not about this person appearing on this TV set, appearing on that TV set. That's my first question. When Tundu was introducing you, it occurred to me that you are occupying the same position that was once occupied by a man called Dr. Doyin Okupe. He was also senior special assistant to the president on public affairs. And he was an attack dog initially. Then he said he had become an attack lion. What kind of attack animal are you in your own case? Are you an attack cat or an attack bull or an attack whatever? Those two questions, quickly.
Dr. Abati, first of all, I pride myself on not attacking anybody. That's the irony. You cannot have two radical extremes, more extremely opposite than myself and Dr. Doyin Okupe in terms of approach. My approach is, I believe in decorous discourse. I believe that when two people who disagree have a conversation, they can disagree amicably, respectfully, and in a way that's really abides by the best of decorum. So that's my approach. My approach also is not to make other people feel bad about their positions. Look, if you love PDP, continue loving PDP. If you love Goodluck Jonathan's legacy, then continue loving Goodluck Jonathan's legacy. I have no issues with anybody. My own is basically to lay out the facts and figures and say, look, this is what we've done. This is what we have not done. What we have done is what can be verified. I'm not going to come and tell you that we're building Lagos Ibadan Expressway if I know in my heart that we're not building Lagos Ibadan Expressway. If I'm coming out to tell you that, I'm telling you that it's going to be completed next year. You can hold me to that word. Same thing with Second Niger Bridge. Same thing with Boni Bodo Road. Same thing with airports across the country. Zungeru, 700 megawatts power plant in Niger State, 215 megawatts in Kaduna power plant coming up, I believe, next year as well. There are so many projects that are going to be commissioned next year that we've been working on since 2015, 2016, that are finally going to now manifest into the lives of our people. So my position is basically to say, look, this is where we are. This is where President Muhammadu Buhari is taking us. And these are the facts and figures that underlay this. Now, I'm also realistic about the fact that not all is well, because not all is well. If all was well, there's no need for a government. Governments are elected to solve problems. And that's why we have problems, and we are elected to solve them. And we must now solve them. I think the question you asked about the plan for the legacy is really this. The question for Nigerians at the end of the day, when the Second Niger Bridge after 40 years is finally going to be constructed, rail lines across the country. I didn't even mention Wari Itakpe rail line, 326 kilometers, abandoned since 1987, completed by this president. Abuja Kaduna was completed by this president. Lagos Ibadan was started and completed by this president. Within the next 18 months, the Kaduna to Kano rail line will be completed during the life of this administration. I didn't even mention the Petroleum Industry Act, which had been on the burner for 20 years. It was this administration that got it done. The deep offshore production sharing contract act amendment, saving us $1.5 billion annually in new revenues. That was done by this administration when it should have been done 20 years ago. NLNG Train 7, $12 billion investment is now undergoing construction. The last one was done in 2008. So a lot of things that have been on the table are now actually being done. And I believe ultimately with social investment and all of these other things, agricultural diversification and all of these other things, all of these things will be the legacy of the president. And hopefully by the time Mr. President's done, the security question would have been more fundamentally addressed in a way that even that can be another feather in Mr. President's cap.
What about cohesion and national unity as tenets of the president's legacy? Because I'm sure you're aware that today's Nigeria is more divided than we've ever been.
You know, look, this has been a major part of the national conversation. Some of this has to do with the fact that President Muhammadu Buhari by nature is not somebody who is going to be walking through markets, kissing babies and shaking hands. That's not the nature of the public servant that he is. he's not a quote-unquote rock star politician in that sense of the modern term of framing a rock star politician. What he is a sincere, hardworking, and committed public servant. That maybe for some people he's not charismatic enough, but for others they're concerned about the fact that he has personal integrity that allows him to get things done, like the Petroleum Industry Act that was not done because of the collusion that we had seen between international oil companies and corrupt politicians over the last 2 decades. They're concerned about the fact of, okay, the resources that we have, as limited as they are now, are they going to actual infrastructural expansion that you can see and touch? Or are they is it just audio projects, propaganda? I think anybody, in 2016, when we said we were doing Lagos Ibadan rail line, people say, propaganda. Which government has done rail line start and complete in the history of this country? Which one? Nobody had, until President Muhammadu Buhari did it. So I think this is where I think a lot of progress can be made. But on the question of unity, because that's what you asked about, I think that some of this has to do with the fact that you have a president who comes from the north, right, who people have tried as much as possible to paint with an ethnic brush. You've heard the claims that under his administration that more northerners have been appointed to office in the federal government, for example, under his watch, than any other part of the country. And people believe that. But when we did the compilation, the entire composition of government, all his appointments from the time he started office to date, we found that 55% of the appointments in his administration had gone to southern Nigeria, with a predominant bulk to the southwest. That's the irony of the whole thing. And another thing, my sister, on this question too, is there's been an attempt, if you've been watching carefully, to kind of create an ethnic blackmail on developmental projects. So let me give you an example. When we decided to do the $2.8 billion AKK Ajaokuta Kaduna Kano gas pipeline, another infrastructure which I had not mentioned until now, a major investment that's going to allow us to eventually export Nigerian gas into the international market through the Sahara into Europe. When that project was done, they said, the president wants to send Niger Delta gas to the north, right? When we said we were going to do Kano Maradi rail line, they said, ethnic agenda, ethnic agenda. When we did Second Niger Bridge, Lagos Ibadan Expressway, Lagos Ibadan rail line, new international airport in Port Harcourt, Second Niger Bridge, and all these other projects, nobody is saying ethnic agenda. My point is that whatever this president does, whether it's in the interest of the nation or not, they tend to paint everything he does with an ethnic brush. But when he does something for a part of the country that he is not from, everybody keeps quiet. And I find that suspicious. So is it about the president, or is it about how the president is being painted on the cohesion and national unity question? I think that's something we should be asking ourselves.
Okay, Ajuri, it's quite very interesting to me, my very good friend Ajuri, that you dismissed the statistics of the National Bureau of Statistics that said there was 8% unemployment rate of working population, not the entire 200 million population, working population, just that correction. You dismissed that stat as a lie, but same you, Ajuri, were quick to go on TV and punch your fist in the air when they said we grew by 5%. GDP growth was 5%, and you became this analyst on basal effect. And it's the same Nigeria Bureau of Statistics that put out that report of 0.1% growth. So what changed for you? And secondly, let me also throw another stats to you. Not my stats, but you can check worldpovertyclock.io. That says over 80 million Nigerians are living in abject poverty. And you have spent billions and billions of naira on social investment and welfare program. How do we juxtapose this figure? The billions you've spent in social investment and Nigeria having the largest number of people living in poverty, abject poverty, extreme poverty in the world, and the dreams and aspiration of President Muhammadu Buhari to bring 100 million people out of poverty.
Thank you very much, Rufai. I almost could envision the research team looking through their smartphones trying to figure out how we can respond to this point Ajuri made. Let me just say very quickly that the notion of comparing unemployment data, which has to do, and by the way, this is not something I'm saying to abuse the NBS. This has to do with the fact that we need accurate data. If we're going to be able to plan economic interventions, short, medium-term, long-term economic development planning in this country, you have to have accurate data, which is why this is very important. So it's not about the NBS under President Muhammadu Buhari or under anybody else. It's about institutional strengthening for the sake of the nation. That's number one. Number two, the idea that you would compare unemployment data, which requires a very finite a number of NBS staff going across the nooks and crannies of the entire federation, essentially trying to do headcounts on formal and informal MSMEs. You're comparing that with GDP growth figures that are verifiable based on the resources that we can actually track, because these are formal, these are institutionalized resources that are moving through banks, moving in and out of the country, etc. You can't compare population data and GDP data, even though they're both coming out of the NBS, because they're both collated totally differently. I think anybody who understands data collection would recognize the difference between population data collation and economic statistics data collation around finance, around money that's coming in and out of the country from various sectors. These are things that anybody can come up with. And we don't even need the NBS to do that. The CBN can do that and other institutions can do that, and it's cross-checked. And that is why we can stand on it with confidence and talk about it. I try as much as I can, my brother, not to punch into the air. I try to be a gentleman. Hopefully, I will try and limit that moving forward.
Well, very quickly, just before we go, one of the many achievements of the Buhari administration, quoted by Femi Adesina in another interview, is the fact that for the first time, this is the president who has signed into law the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act. The president signed that bill into law in 2018. But since then, we've not seen any effort to put that law into effect. What we have seen has been the spectacle of persons living with disabilities going to the National Assembly to go and protest. The National Disabilities Commission has not even been set up. Why is that so? And would that be something we can look forward to because it looks like a low-hanging fruit before the expiration of the term of this administration, something that the president can leave behind as part of his legacy, that under his watch, he did something for persons who are physically challenged in Nigeria, beyond just appending his signature to a law that is beginning to look like a dead law.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, you know, the Disability Act, obviously any law that comes into effect, it requires time for gestation into implementation, right? You don't expect a situation where overnight, you know, the private sector companies in the country are all going to be building ramps on day one and they're just going to appear. I mean, these things take time to construct, takes time to get the associations and unions together to say, look, this is how we're going to handle this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one part of it. But I think on the other part of it, I think it wouldn't be quite fair to neglect the fact that President Muhammadu Buhari has built into his interventions outright stipulations and mandates for the inclusion of the disabled population in the country. I'll give you an example. As we implemented the 2.3 trillion naira economic sustainability plan under the leadership and watch of His Excellency the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, one of the mandates on the survival fund, for example, was that we would have a core minimum of 5% set aside for businesses owned and run by physically disadvantaged persons in the country. The last batch of N-Power, for example, we put in place mandates and stipulations that said a quota, I believe it's 5%, must go to Nigerians who are physically disadvantaged in one way or another. So across interventions, whether it's MSME lending, whether it's direct job creation, at least on the part of government, or whether it's the enactment and now the implementation of the National Disability Act, I think we've been putting our money where our mouth is in terms of making sure that we prioritize it in actuality as against just on paper. But I would plead for, you know, some additional time, obviously, to work with all of the actors involved in making that a reality. Because even if government agencies, government buildings and institutions successfully build ramps and they have the disabled-friendly bathrooms and the like, you know, that's going to be just a drop in the ocean compared to what you'll need from the private sector in making those facilities available to accommodate the physically disadvantaged. But I think we should take note of the fact that there's a reason why it was President Muhammadu Buhari that signed it into law and not any previous administration. I think there was a lot of pushback on the part of the private sector in terms of the infrastructural requirements to accommodate the physically disadvantaged in the country. But the president pushed it through and said, look, we have to do this. It's in the interest of our citizens. Let's get it done. And he got it done. And so let's now work toward the full implementation of it.
Well, the main point is that there is ability in disability. And the Nigerians who represented us at the Paralympics in Tokyo, the other week, have proved the point. And they deserve to be treated as equal citizens. Thank you very much, Ajuri Ngelale, for joining us on the morning show.